It's my pleasure to be here with you today. I'd also like to thank the Learning Bar for hosting this very important well-being series. And a huge thank you to each of you for signing up to spend this next hour with us. Perhaps you signed up for this session thinking that you were attending a session by a medical doctor. I'm not a medical doctor, but the model I will present for creating trauma-sensitive schools is not based on a medical model. I've studied trauma both personally and professionally for many years. As a student of trauma from a young age, I have firsthand knowledge of the importance that a caring educator can have. As a professional, I've had the awesome opportunity in my 38-year career in education at the school, district, and ministry level to serve the most vulnerable children. I thoroughly enjoyed finding solutions to problems of inclusion through collaborative partnerships. Like you, I am a leader. I don't pretend to have all the answers to this important work, but rather have merged my own leadership experience in this area with research, resources, and tools on trauma-sensitive practices. You continue to be deeply committed to advanced trauma practices and education, and this is very apparent with your presence here today. I recently retired from my role as a school principal, the culmination of my 38-year career in K-12 public education. In addition to the work that I do with the Learning Bar and as a professor at Queen's University, I serve as a special education for administrators instructor and writer of curriculum with the Catholic Principals Council of Ontario. The work that I'm presenting here today is part of a course developed for CPCO on trauma-informed leadership. So right now, I'd like to start with a few questions just to gauge our interest and put us on the same page. Turning over to you, Nikki.
Great, thank you, Laurie. So I'm going to launch a poll here. So can you see the poll now? Yes. So basically, Laurie's going to go through these 4 questions. I just want to highlight there are 4. I know you can probably only see 3. So I'm going to give you a chance, a couple of seconds to go through that and answer yes or no to those questions. And then I'll end the poll and share that. And then Laurie will go through some of the actual answers with you. So give you a couple more time. I know we've got almost 100 people on, so I want to make sure that everyone gets a chance to respond, or at least a quarter of the people get a chance to respond. Okay, if you haven't had a chance, we're about halfway there. Oh, very good. Everyone's going much faster now. And I'm going to end the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And I'll share the results. So you should be able to see the results there, Laurie.
I can see the results, Nikki, and I noticed that 97% believe that trauma-informed practices excuse behavior and allow kids. Sorry, let me start again. 3% believe that trauma-informed practices excuse behavior and allow kids, I read that wrong, to act inappropriately because something happened to them. And I wrote the question, so that's a really bad place to be. However, most excitingly is that 97% disagree. And that is correct. It's going to go forward on my questions here. So trauma actually helps us to understand behavior, not to excuse it. A trauma-informed school is a safe and supportive environment with clear expectations and systems to repair relationships when behavior challenges it. The lens of trauma helps us to understand behavior and better understand how to support students by meeting their underlying need rather than punishing its symptom. A trauma-informed school never allows its expectations, behaviorally or otherwise, for students impacted by trauma to lower. So number 2, trauma-informed is strictly a social-emotional intervention. And once again, right answer, 98% on no. These are a smart group. The trauma-informed process impacts and encompasses all aspects of a school, including staff. Sorry, I'm just having to move the poll around on my screen here. Staff and student well-being, curriculum design and implementation, and approaches to learning. When the lens of trauma is fully embedded in a school, it will influence every aspect of the organization. Good job. And number 3, but perhaps Nikki, you can share number 3. I can't see that on my screen.
Yeah, sorry about
A little bit below.
I'll shut this. The damage caused by trauma to the brain can be healed. So 80% said yes, and 20% said no.
Interesting. And that is a more difficult question. So yes, it can. Though unlearning and rebuilding can take lots of time and patience, children can learn new ways of thinking, relating, and responding, have new experiences with trusted adults that can help buffer stress and develop ways of coping with stress. The child's frontal cortex or thinking brain continues to develop throughout adolescence and even into adulthood. And every positive encounter that you can provide will help engineer that development. So good job once again. And question 4. Can you tell me those results, Nikki?
Yes, so we received trauma training on trauma. We are trauma informed. We had 37% said yes, and 63% said no.
Again, good job. These are, I made the questions kind of tough. While receiving a training about trauma is an important early step to the trauma-informed process, it does not make us school trauma-informed. Trauma-informed is about a universal approach to address practice, program, policy, and culture. It is a multi-year process focused more on a journey than a destination. Well done and good job. So I invite you now to think about why you might be here, and only you know that reason. So is it because of a child that's in your school or home? Is it a staff member that you are supporting? These are all reasons that we have to be here today. Perhaps it's clear that the topic that we have before us is a very important one. Trauma is incredibly prevalent and highly impactful. For the first time in more than 50 years, the worldwide prevalence of children's mental health diagnoses has surpassed more those of physical injury and illness. In Canada, only 1 in 5 children who need mental health services receives them. In schools, trauma not only shows up in the experiences of students, but educators also are impacted by trauma. And this is trauma that they experience outside the school, and vicarious trauma that they may receive inside the school by supporting those who are most vulnerable. Additionally, for some students, their experiences of trauma are taking place within the school building when triggered by reminders of trauma. Trauma impacts the ability of students to learn, teachers to teach, and members of a school community to form positive, supportive relationships with one another.
Laurie, may I just interject here? There's been a question.
Yes.
And you might have answered this, or you might answer this within the presentation. What's the difference between the terms trauma aware and trauma sensitive?
I'm so glad that whomever is on here has asked that question. Thank you. Because that is actually coming up in a few slides. And that's being trauma aware or trauma sensitive or trauma informed. Those are terms that are actually used interchangeably. Trauma informed began as more of a care model, more of a mental model or a child welfare model. Trauma informed, that's trauma informed. And then it morphed into the school setting. So if we can wait for just a bit, I think I'll explain it more clearly once we get to that slide. But it's an excellent question that you may pick up books. I have several books, trauma-informed schools, trauma-sensitive schools, trauma-aware schools, and there is a little bit of a continuum there that I'd like to explain. Thank you.
Laurie, just one other thing, sorry. As opposed to there are questions coming in, what I might do is wait between the sections where you've got one of the title slides and then ask a series of questions at that point, if that's okay.
Beautiful. I'm glad you have the questions. It's such important work, and as you can see, we're all here to learn more. So that's wonderful. Okay. So what I've done is I've placed a graphic on the right-hand side of your screen. And just a little bit to put this work in context for you about me. I'm here because I have a passion for supporting those who are marginalized because of previous or ongoing trauma. This may mean the staff member who is misunderstood as difficult, or the child who is not able to attend school because his behaviors are too disruptive. These, as well as others who exhibit a variety of traits, are the students and staff who are in our schools. And once again, just to put my work in context, the graphic that's labeled PACE is a dyadic developmental psychotherapy approach, and it's actually used in one of our schools, a Ministry of Education classroom in my district. This specialized classroom was the vision of my colleague, Dr. Denny Mellum, and myself, when we felt like we were very unsuccessful in supporting our students with complex trauma attachment disorder. And these were in regular classrooms that we were having difficulty placing these students. What we found in our work with Dr. Shan Phillips, a psychologist who specializes in attachment disorders, is that this approach could be expanded to all classrooms, and we did so throughout our district. It was even found to be an effective method for those who didn't have attachment disorder or that we didn't know had attachment disorder. I've applied and adapted the PACE approach in the development of this trauma-sensitive leaders guide for daily interactions. So I've just outlined 5 steps here, and perhaps I'll just very briefly go through each one. So number 1, focus on relationships and connections. And the first key to all trauma-informed work or trauma-sensitive work is relationships, especially when creating and maintaining trauma-sensitive environments. Relationships and connections are critical. One of my key learnings as a leader in working with students, staff, families, and community was that no one really cared what I knew or how much education I had, but what they cared about was how I treated them. Always empower, never disempower. Individuals who have experienced trauma often seek to control their environment to protect themselves, and their actions will generally deteriorate when they feel more helpless. Provide unconditional, positive regard. As caring adults who have the opportunity to help students build trust and form relationships, and that's who we are. For example, if a student tells you, "I hate you, you're mean," or other words that maybe not as nice, respond with unconditional positive regard by saying, "I'm sorry you feel that way. I care about you, and I hope you'll get your work done." And I understand being an educator that that's difficult, and I did not do that all the time. So no judgment there. We're all on a path. Maintain high expectations. In fact, the same high expectations for one who has experienced trauma as for those who have not. And check your assumptions, observe, and question. Trauma can affect anyone and can manifest in many different ways. So don't assume you know one story, and take a stance of curiosity and ask questions. So here's the answer to the first question that we had here today. And as you can see, we have a bit of a framework, a developmental framework for trauma. This is based on the Missouri Department of Mental Health and Partners, which is an excellent resource, and it's a bit of a continuum. School-based research is relatively, it's a new area of study. As I mentioned before, it's always been taken as a model of care, a medical model, so to speak, and it's been developed in schools about the past 2 decades. Most of the research on trauma has been focused on, as I said, mental health care, child welfare, and public health. While our ultimate goal is to become trauma-informed, for our purposes here today, I decided to take a trauma-sensitive approach. We are all at differing places in our trauma-informed journey. You will also notice that I use these terms interchangeably. The goal, of course, is to move from one indicator to another and to actually become trauma-informed, which is trauma responsive practices are the norm, and the model is accepted and thoroughly embedded. And this is in place regardless if the leader is present or not. So all members of the community are on board. And the indicators are not exhaustive, and there is no specific order for completion. They're designed to support the implementation and success of each other. Schools should consider which indicators align with their data and with their current priorities. Who are the students in your school and who are the staff in your school, and how do you need to respond? So determine where to begin, and then work towards a journey of trauma-informed approach. So it's an ongoing journey. I hope that answers the question. And I don't want to give you too much research. We are going to explore some frameworks that could help you within your practice. In my research, one of the main providers of sources of literature on this subject is from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration in the United States. As you probably know, most of the research on trauma has come from the United States and the UK and Australia. Canada is beginning to do some research. So regardless of where you are in your trauma-informed journey, it's important that you know that there's a common understanding of trauma. The general framework presented here shows that the purpose of creating a common understanding is to get us all on the same page, to identify and realize the widespread impact of trauma, understand the potential pathways for recovery. Again, recognize those two go hand in hand, I find. The signs and symptoms of trauma in clients, families, staff, and others involved in the system, and then how to respond, which is most important. We integrate the knowledge about trauma into all our policies, procedures, and practices. And in a few slides, I'll show you how I've done that. And then the resisting of re-traumatization of children, as well as the adults. We have to think of the adults as well that care for those most vulnerable children. Once again, hopefully as you unpack this a little bit later, and I do have PowerPoint slides that I can send to you and tons of resources if you would like, it won't become so daunting if it is today. Again, it's more of a high level approach to, these are some of the things that I've found in my research, and these are some of the things that I know from practice. So there are 6 principles of a trauma-informed school. I think in the interest of time, Nikki, I'm not going to go through each of them, maybe just very quickly. I will highlight them. So the 6 principles of a trauma-informed approach. And notice I've used the words trauma-informed again, rather than trauma-sensitive, because this is the goal, is to move to a trauma-informed approach. One is safety, and that's critical, and not just physical safety, emotional, mental health safety. And that's embedded throughout the organization. Trustworthiness and transparency. It's okay to say, I don't have the answer as a leader, as you know, I don't have the answer, but I will find out for you, or I will help you with that. And to take that stance of curiosity always helps as well. Peer support. This is integral to the organizational and service delivery approach. And this is understood as a key vehicle for building trust, establishing safety and empowerment. Belonging, the research on belonging is fundamental and so important to this work. Collaboration and mutuality. There's a recognition that healing happens in relationships and in the meaningful sharing of power and decision making. The organization that recognizes that everyone has a role to play in the trauma-informed approach. One does not have to be a therapist to be therapeutic. And I always really valued the role of the secretary in my school as the first point of contact with families. The secretary sets the tone. The custodian plays an amazing role in a school. So really, you're not on a journey by yourself. You're going to seek out your staff who have that interest in becoming trauma-informed as a first step. Empowerment, choice, and voice. The trauma-informed approach aims to strengthen the staff, family members, and community. And that has happened, and I will give you an example here in a moment. Also, we have to appreciate and respond to the cultural, historical, and gender issues of those in our care. For each of these principles, it is essential to consider the impact of inequity, community, and historical trauma, and systematic oppression. These principles should be used to guide every aspect of a school's trauma-informed journey, and when fully realized, lead to more equitable outcomes, which is what we want. Think of how these principles can prompt action and evaluate existing structures within your environment. So just to kind of tuck that away and to continue to think about those 6 principles as we move forward here today. Am I going too quick, Nikki? No? Okay.
No, it's good.
Okay, thank you. So as I mentioned, this is actually a form that I've adapted using the 6 principles and taking the lens of the school leader. I understand and I recognize that there are a number of people from differing roles in education, but for this one, and you can adapt it to the district level, absolutely. But I was thinking with the lens of the school leader. So I hope it's easy to see on the screen. Under safety, you reinforce a no judgment approach when listening to others' perspective, prioritize emotional and physical safety. And what you're doing is you're looking at your policy and you're finding, with your team, is this inconsistent with what we do? And I know at the school level, a district level, your policies are there for you, and you may work on them as a team, but they can be a higher level. So perhaps protocols, or perhaps you're influential in policy development at your board, and this would be critical. But back to the school level, you're looking to see our safety plans consistent with this no judgment approach. Even looking at the physical safety, where are those places? Map out where those places are in our schools where there could be evidence of trauma activity. And when I say trauma activity, I talk about some bullying, examples of bullying in any form. Trustworthiness and transparency recognizes trust is earned through relationship and recognizes that some may not trust easily. And then on the right-hand side of the form, you can make some notes as to how you think you could make this work and your policies and practices, protocols, more trauma-informed. I won't go through each one, and it will be there for you. So let's unpack this a little bit. What is a trauma-sensitive school? I've taken the stance of trauma-sensitive, as I've indicated. And there are some very important blue words. And perhaps I know it's on the screen, but I think it's okay for me to read this to you to kind of hit home that it is important. So a trauma-sensitive school is one in which all students feel safe, welcomed, and supported, and where addressing trauma's impact, learning on a school-wide basis is at the center of its educational mission. So there's your mission statements. It's a place where ongoing inquiry-based process allows for the necessary teamwork, coordination, creativity, and sharing of responsibility for all students, and where continuous learning is for educators as well as students. There are many definitions of trauma-sensitive schools. There are many definitions of trauma-informed schools. I liked this one because of the continuous learning for educators as well as students. Because if we're not learning and growing in our practice, it's hard to meet all of the needs within our communities.
Sorry,
Yeah.
I'm just going to ask something because it actually relates quite well to that slide. So somebody did ask, referring to question 3 in the poll, said that the damage to the brain by trauma can be healed in children since their brains are still growing. What about healing trauma damage in adults? And that's what I kind of went back to. You put learning is for educators as well. So what about healing trauma damage in adults?
Yeah, it's more difficult, absolutely more difficult. It takes longer. We never give up on the neuroplasticities of our brains. And research has shown that even the very elderly can grow new dendrites and form connections in different ways. And that's what it's all about, is trying to get to that complex developmental trauma from when the adult was a child. Those adverse experiences that we may have had as children, we carry those with us if we haven't had a supportive environment. So really, for the work that I've done, I would say yes, Nikki, it can happen, but it takes a lot of support and a increase in protective factors. And from what I mean by that is who are the caring and safe partners, family members, friends, therapists, and how can we move forward with that work, perhaps through dyadic developmental psychotherapy, which can work for adults as well. Some use, eye gaze therapy, hypnosis. So there are ways, and I think with the adults, it's more of an adaptation, learning how to cope.
Thanks, Laurie.
Thank you. So we're going to unpack invisible backpacks here today. You probably have seen this concept, this analogy. It was originally introduced to conceptualize diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it's been expanded now to include trauma. So the premise is that we don't know what each individual brings to work or school each day. Individuals with trauma may or may not show what is in their backpacks. When viewing the invisible backpack through a trauma-informed lens, it becomes clear that everyone has one. Some packs have a history of or currently ongoing abuse and neglect. Other packs hold invisible poor self-esteem and confidence. Some packs hold peer pressure, bullying, harassment, and mistreatment. Others hold perfectionism, and that's part of trauma as well, a response to trauma. Some packs hold individual problems. Others hold multiple people that one person has taken on to care for. Backpacks can be stuffed so full there's no attempt to zip it closed. Hence the spillover in the daily life and school setting of mental and behavioral health problems. Even if you don't see the backpack, it's there and it can be heavy. Many of our youth carry an invisible backpack. 1 out of every 4 children attending school have been exposed to childhood trauma. That's a high percent. And this affects their learning and behavior. These traumatic experiences can be the result of intentional violence, such as child physical or sexual abuse, or domestic violence, or the result of natural disasters, accidents, or wars. Childhood trauma affects brain development, and it's associated with depression, suicide, anxiety, behavioral difficulties, and decreased reading ability. Surveys of adults, such as the Adverse Childhood Survey, or ACEs, and that's a survey used in Canada as well. Most public health units hold that data. This reveals that childhood trauma is relatively common and may affect people of all backgrounds. This backpack full of stuff is what you and your team are faced with each day.
You're attempting to do some work on the side there, Laurie.
Magically wanted me to do something else. So let's unpack the backpack. I am unlovable. No one will take care of me. Adults will hurt me. I am not worthy. Adults lie. I am worthless. You can't hurt me. I'll get you first. No place is safe. So don't judge someone based on the backpack size, how beat up it might be, or especially the contents inside, because chances are they aren't the ones that put it all in the backpack to begin with.
Laurie, do you have...
So,
sorry, Laurie. Do you know where the statistic came from, the 1 in 4? I've even read 1 in 3, but I couldn't put it down anywhere. Do you know where that came from?
Yes. So that came from one of the ACEs studies and most of, as I said before, most of the that foundational work has been done in the United States, captured by the United States. Our ACEs data normally sits with the Public Health Department. So I believe, I can look it up, but I believe it was one of the studies through the Substance and Abuse Administration. And as we go forward, I believe it's, I'll have to look at my notes, but I believe it's 2 out of 3 have experienced at least 2. So the increase of ACEs, or childhood adversities, there are students with perhaps 9 out of 10 ACEs in our school, and adults as well. And that's further work that I've done in looking at the ACEs as adults. It's a good little activity to do, maybe for another session. Thank you. So the vision we have for a trauma-sensitive environment is to repack the invisible backpack so that all feel safe, capable, likable, and lovable. We want to change the lens through which we view behavior, from what's wrong with you to what's happened to you. We want to dig deeper and begin to understand the why, or the history behind the what, the attitude and the behavior, which breaks down barriers and builds bridges of understanding with one another. The good news is that by increasing protective factors such as the caring adult in school or in work, excuse me, can mitigate the effects of trauma. Begin by changing the question, and you will see immediate results. And that has happened. Once again, a little study that has really taken off in the United States. Perhaps you've heard of the film Paper Tigers. It was based on the work of this phenomenal principal, Jim Sperlner. And what happened at Lincoln in Walla Walla, Washington, was that Jim came in at a time where it's just chaos in the school. There was so much violence. Leadership had just changed. There was no real connection with students. There was gang-related violence. And Jim went to a seminar on trauma-informed schools. And it hit him that he was being punitive. Their practices were punitive. And really, it wasn't the fault of the student. And when they began to unpack how the students were behaving with the demographics of the students and what they were finding about, did they bring, lunch to school? Who were they hanging out with in the parking lot? Who were their friends, or if they had any friends? What they found was there was a high number of ACEs. So what he did was actually quite simple. He started to stand outside the school door every day as an action. And that's something that's very easy to do, right? To meet those students outside and to be the first person that they see at school, perhaps in the morning and at the end of the day. He started to see there were disciplinary office referrals. They went down from 2009 to 2013, school incidents requiring police action. And there was a lot of police action. Went from 2009 to 2013, went significantly down as well as suspensions. And they started by also not giving homework, understanding that the students who were there at school were there for a reason. And the reason was for connection, whether it was good or bad. And home was not a safe environment. So by sending them home to do homework in the evening, that wasn't going to work, it wasn't safe. And also they didn't have the tools to do so. Also, it wasn't safe to send them home for suspension. So they started keeping them in school. In one of the videos that I watched of this work, one of the teachers, high school teachers, at the end of every day said, "I love you" to the kids. And that was such an aha moment for other staff. And it was such an aha moment for the students, who were very taken aback. And it worked. So what Jim says is that hope was the antidote and resiliency was the antidote, and building relationships and connections. And that expanded to the community as well. The police services started to learn more about trauma-informed systems, and they started to use those practices in their work as well. So it became a great community partnership and a whole school event. So we've talked a lot about trauma, but we haven't really unpacked as to what trauma is and how it can exhibit itself in those we serve. So it contains three common elements. It was unexpected. Nobody planned for it. The person was therefore unprepared. There was nothing the person could do to stop it from happening, and beyond a person's control. And what is trauma? There's a great debate about what is trauma and the exact definition. Once again, I rely on the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Service Administration. It's touted as the one predominantly used. They define trauma as the experience of an event, series of events, or circumstances that an individual perceives as physically or emotionally threatening and that have lasting harmful effects on the individual's functioning in one or more domains, including mental, physical, social, and emotional. It's really important to note that it's not the actual event, it's the perception of the event. And that was a key learning for me in my work. Types of trauma. Knowing the types of trauma can assist you as a leader in making decisions about day-to-day school business. Multiple kinds of events such as child maltreatment, violence in the home, substance abuse and misuse, loneliness, on and on and on, can all be experiences of trauma. The complex trauma, that's the third on the slide there, that's the complex trauma that I was speaking of, the developmental trauma that happens before the age of 18. And that is the one that is critical in trying to provide supports for and trying to provide enough protective factors that those children can begin to feel like they belong, like they have relationships, and also we know that there's secondary or vicarious trauma in our schools because we work with the most vulnerable of children. So once again, there are types of trauma. We don't need to know all the types of trauma, but the takeaway is just how we respond to trauma. So how we respond. This has been a little heavy, so let's have a picture here as to lighten things up. So if you're like me, I don't like snakes. I'm not sure how you feel about snakes. So real threat or imagined, and you can put that in the chat if you like, real threat or imagined, how you feel about having the snake on the screen.
Imagined. Oh, real. Imagined. Hated it. I'm here like I've got all goosebumps, so I know how I feel. The majority is
Okay.
imagined. No, it's half and half actually, Laurie.
Half and half, okay.
Yeah.
And for me, it's very real as well, and I won't get into details. So how about this one?
My slide hasn't
Real
changed.
threat or imagined?
Oh, there we go. That's it. Yeah.
Real threat or imagined? Would that bother you if you were mowing the grass?
Chantal, that's an interesting one. Depends on perception. Everything else is imagined.
Okay. Very good. So as you can see, you can have a traumatic event. If this is a real threat to you, then perhaps this is a real threat. And let's move on away from the snakes. So trauma-informed practices offer an alternative paradigm to traditional behavior-based approaches of understanding and intervention. Trauma-informed schools are places that provide safe and supportive environments for children to learn and educators to work. Yet in every environment, there are reminders of trauma. As a trauma-sensitive leader, you take a stance of curiosity. You recognize that many school stakeholders, including educators, support staff, and families and caregivers, may also be affected by traumatic events and may be triggered by these simple events or reminders. Your supportive and empathetic stance is what is necessary for those who may be traumatized. And just to point out the glasses on the little blob there, I guess it is, I think you're overreacting. So not taking the stance of trauma sensitive or trauma informed, but rather looking at it from their own viewpoint. So brain-based behaviors and brain-based research has certainly become huge in the past few years. I love the work of Dr. Bruce Perry. And he's actually written the book with Oprah, which is when I became very interested in his work. And he really takes the ideas of neuroscience down to an educator's level. So I do I do encourage you to look at his work, to Google him. So having an understanding of how one's brain responds to real or perceived threat is important to know. And this is important to how we design our programs and services in our schools. So this world-renowned guy, this trauma expert, Dr. Bruce Perry, who I believe also worked in Alberta at one point, developed a neurosequential model, which is guided by the understanding that when the lower brain is not regulated, well organized, and efficient, the higher brain regions, such as the cortex, cannot function. When kids are dysregulated or upset, they have little access to the cortex's logic, insight, and reason. Youth with complex trauma histories often struggle with poor behavior related to low brain dysregulation, particularly in the areas of sensory integration and self-regulation. In traumatized kids, overreactions to sounds and touch, hyperactivity, or an inability to smoothly change activities and make transitions are all common behaviors. This neurosequential model helps us recognize these behaviors for what they are. They're the result of the child's low brain dysregulation and sensitized stress response system. So Perry's sequential model is called Regulate, Relate, and Reason. And it shows us how to re-engage the thinking brain when a person is stressed and operating in survival mode. These strategies work well for students or adults as well, whose stress response is always easily triggered. So here on the screen, you will notice a number of routines that I'm sure you do, perhaps yourself. Over on the right-hand side, mindfulness, guided imagery, grounding exercises, doodling, walking, running. These are all, adult activities or children activities in the school, and we haven't called them what they are, perhaps, as regulating activities, important activities, not just activities that are we want to do, are fun to do. They're important activities to regulate, and then to relate.
Sorry, Laurie, I was trying to jump in earlier on, but I was on mute, so it didn't work very well. I just wanted to let you know we have 15 minutes left.
Oh, thank you. 15 minutes for the entire, that goes quick, doesn't it? Okay.
You've only got half left.
Pardon me?
You
Okay,
have like the other half left.
I'll do speed now. So we've got a good foundation though, Nikki, don't we? We've got good understanding. So for relate, one level up on our brain after the child is regulated or the adult, these are some actions that can be done. And then at the top, using the thinking brain or the top-down brain to really be able to collaborate and plan. These are the higher order skills, if you want to call them that, that we really want to get to. But you can't start to teach or have conversations or have expectations if the brain is not regulated. So what we want to do is break the cycle of trauma that may be real or perceived, such as that snake, maybe triggers something else, an emotional or psychological time. And that's represented by behavioral problems in the school setting. And those behavioral problems then are punished, getting up and screaming, running out the door, that flight or fight takes over. And then there's trauma again from the punishment. It's not safe at school. So I just want to highlight this report. This is actually a Canadian report, one of the only ones that I could find. And it's on why educator well-being matters. And it's from the Ontario Principals Council. And so what they wanted to do was exactly that, find how well are educators and what's their understanding of trauma and trauma sensitivity. So first, what they looked at, or actually, I've only included a few of their slides that pertain to us today. To what degree does dealing with student trauma negatively impact your well-being or your well-being? And as you can see, the orange is admin, so leaders, and the blue is staff. To what degree does the personal trauma experienced by our staff negatively impact their well-being, negatively impact your well-being, and that's as a leader? So once again, we're looking at those results there. What, if anything, gets in the way of your staff's ability to consistently adopt a trauma-sensitive approach? Check all that apply. And on the screen, what we're seeing is educator stress and burnout. It's there. It's high. Lack of training, lack of time, curriculum pressures, lack of system resources, lack of classroom resources, lack of community resources, and at the smaller end here, lack of interest. So what are the findings? There was a shift in perspective and priorities after this report, a greater awareness of the pressures on educators, the need to effectively support educator well-being, the need for greater organizational commitment to mutual care, ensure educators don't feel alone in the classroom, and the strategy that matters most is the educator. So next steps. I have researched tens and 20, probably 20 different models for developing a sensitive, trauma-sensitive school. And what I found and what I believe is that by taking the 6 steps, the 6 principles of a trauma-informed school, and merging those 6 steps into everything that we do, the safety, the trustworthiness, the peer support, the collaboration and mutuality, on and on and on, that you're really going to hit all of the areas that you need to within your school. And of course, we want to start this process with data. It's a bit of an inquiry approach that I've developed. What is our data telling us about our current school environment, such as student well-being and achievement? What do we require to make a change towards becoming more trauma sensitive? What are the barriers? And what is our understanding of trauma-informed practices? And then what next? So we had some questions, and then these are just some general steps. Again, very important to start with your data, your school climate data, your EQAO data, your early identifications of students transitioning into kindergarten, all that data. You're going to engage your team, review your literature, review your studies. I've tried to drill down into what I think, but there's lots of information out there. Provide training, implement the approach, and then evaluate where you're at. So this is my last slide. Let's recap. A trauma-informed school fundamentally has changed the way it works to promote healthy, resilient educators and learners capable of disrupting the cycle of trauma in their lives and communities and creating more equitable conditions for all. The journey to become trauma-informed is as unique as each school. There's no checklist. It's about trauma-informed on the whole, looking at the whole school. The buy-in, active participation of courageous leaders like yourselves cannot be understated in the trauma-informed journey. While awareness can be built in any school, it takes leadership to guide real practice and policy change. Leadership must actively participate in trauma teams, model a trauma-informed approach in their interactions with staff, and embody the principles of trauma-informed care. I hope that this has been a good step for you in the work we have done here today. Thank you.
Thanks, Laurie. I'm going to open the floor to Q&As, but first of all, I want to just, Deborah Fulton, you've had your hand up since the beginning, and I didn't want to jump in too much. Deborah, did you have anything you wanted to ask? I can put you on talk if you'd like, or I'll just lower your hand while other people write some questions. I'm going to take that as a no then. So maybe I'll just start with a question while people are giving people some time there, Laurie. So you mentioned embedding trauma sensitive principles into decision making. What does that look like?
What does it look like? So actually, I'm just going to stop my share. Is that okay?
Yes, yes, yes.
Yes. Okay. So embedding trauma sensitive schools. So it's first and foremost about creating caring and safe environments for me, and for what I've learned in the research. Starting small. Um, don't start with all your policies and practices. Start with being authentic, building relationships and connections. And that's really what it's all about. Then infuse those the work that you're doing, the relationships, the connections, looking at your data and infusing those pieces into your school policies and procedures or district policies and procedures. But really, it's about starting with authentic relationships and connections. Students need to feel like they belong in the environment that you have.
Okay, I have a question here. Is the OPC document available to download?
It is, absolutely it is, yes. Yes,
Maybe
very easy to find.
and maybe we'll include that in an email at the end. There's a chat, some shifting mindset that it's connection before correction. I like that concept.
I do like that as well.
Yeah. And let me just Jason, could you give me an example of resilience building classroom strategy?
So when I talk about resiliency, I think about belonging, and I think about making that child feel safe and secure. So it's not, I mean, there are all kinds of programs out there, right? The Minds Up program, restorative circles is excellent. Whatever you do, though, it must be done with the intention of building a safe community, building a place where those students feel welcome. It could be something simple as an all about me at the beginning of the year. It doesn't have to be big. And from there, get to know the child. It's really about, I can't say enough about building those connections, doing everything you can to help those students build peer support. Social emotional learning skills are important and build resiliency. I love the casel.org, which is just CASEL.org, is an excellent resource, and it's all online with a variety of steps and you know, different strategies. But again, it's not about a program, I would say. It's more about how you set your stage for belonging, for connection, for authenticity. Also for you know, inquiry is a great resilience builder. Taking the students' strengths and interests into the fold is very very effective. I
Laurie,
can see lots in the chat now.
oh, sorry, Laurie, sorry. I'm going to ask one
No, I
more
was just
question.
looking at the chat.
From Stacey, do you have suggestions or strategies on helping more resistant adults to shift their mindset from choosing to misbehave? That's a good one. I know that you've got a lot of resources that you put together that we can send after the webinar, but
I do. Yes. My friend Conchetta is here today. Hi, Conchetta. And she knows that I love resources. So yes, I have lots I can I can share with you for sure. Resources that will help you along the way. Some that I just love, some children's books, some research, all of these resources that you will find good in your practice. But you know what? I'm going to give you an example. When I was first in a VP position at a small rural school with trauma, I didn't tell my staff, you know, what I was doing in my approach. And after I was there for a few weeks, I found one of my team members say, Laura, you just like you don't approach the student in a way that like you don't say like why did you do that? You don't do that. You stand there and say, if the student's safe, you stand there and say, I'm curious to know what are you doing right now? And I'm really are you okay? Because I'm trying to understand, what it is you're doing. So using the PACE approach, exactly, Conchetta. Using the PACE approach is amazing. And you can find this online. I can send it to you as well. It's simple. It's basically playfulness, acceptance, curiosity, and empathy. Strong on curiosity and empathy. Start with curiosity. Always take that. Start with curiosity with your staff as well. I wonder, is everything okay? Like really not assuming again that we know what's in one's backpack. But back to Chantel's, I believe it was Chantel, back to Chantel's question of authentic examples as a leader for your staff, taking those, they watch, right? Our schools are places where, our actions are very visible. So really watching and minding what we're doing as leaders and taking that stance of curiosity, you know. Yeah, I won't belabor the point, but hopefully that's helpful. And training, lots of training for staff.
Okay, thank you so much, Laurie. I'm going to cut you off because we have about 2 minutes. So I want to say thank you. It was a great introduction for the impact of trauma on staff and students. And I really think it does help to kind of highlight the importance of understanding your staff, your students, the school climate, as there's a lot of information that needs to be taken on board. And I know that there's a lot of information out there. As a company, the Learning Bar, we do support districts in capturing the right data around staff and student well-being, particularly in relation to some of the things you mentioned around depression, anxiety, sense of belonging. So we will provide some follow-up information on that. I did want to quickly point out that the next webinar is going to take place on May the 13th around embedding well-being in schools and school districts. I'll send some information around that as well. So you will receive the slides and recordings. A few people were asking, and also a lot of the resources and reference to that research that Laurie was talking about. If you do have any questions, you can reach out to the member of staff that emails you, or you can reach out to me. That's it. So thank you again. We made it on the hour, on the dot. So I hope you all have a great day. Thanks. Thank you, Laurie. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.